Hello, BookTube. This is Aaron from Aaron Read a Book or Aaron Read a Book. Um, I haven't done a tag in a few weeks, so I thought I'd do a tag, and I've been tagged in a couple. Gareth from Book Songs and Other Magic has tagged me in a new tag by Book Time with Elvis, talking about classics, and I'm a great lover of classics, so I think it's a good one for me to do. Definitely check out Mark and Gareth's videos as well. Mark's is more of a discussion about what makes a classic, and then he sort of weaponized it into a tag. Um, and Gareth's obviously done his version. And now let's do mine. So it sort of goes through the different elements that can make a classic, and we pick a book for each one. So the first one is the one with a gripping plot and universal themes. So this could describe a lot of classics, I guess. Also, um, what makes a gripping plot is very individualistic. Individualistic, is that a word? Um, I've gone with probably maybe my favourite classic, Anna Karenina, by Tolstoy. I think this is always a good classic um, to give to people who are sort of scared of the classics, because I think people are intimidated by the Russians, especially, and I guess there is some good reason for that with people like Dostoevsky, who could be quite quite in depth and religious, um, so quite difficult. But I think Leo Tolstoy is one of the easiest writers to read, and I do think his themes are universal. He's so good on family and relationships, um, and just as soon as you get into Anna Karenina, there's sort of the the comedy elements of it are quite instant, and then there's just brilliant romance as well. Um, I just think he's so easy to read, and a joy. Yeah, so I'm going to go Anna Karenina. Um, Gripping plot might be pushing the boundary a little bit, but I do think it's an interesting plot. It's a love affair. You don't know what's going to happen to them. Although there is also the problem with classics, it is you often know the ending, so um, you may have already know what happens at the end of this novel, just from its reputation. But I find it gripping every time I read it. I love it. It's so good, and I love this cover as well. I think this is like a painting of an unknown woman, but I think it's a perfect Anna. Um, yeah, and this is my favourite translation as well, which is the Edmonds translation. Yeah, Rosemary Edmonds. I just think it's more poetic than the others, and I sort of value that more than maybe the accuracy of some of the newer translations. But yeah, I love that. The Subversive one. So I'm going to go with the most recent classic I've read, which is North and South by Elizabeth Gaskell. Um, Obviously, this must have been quite subversive at the time. I haven't looked into the history of it very much, but it's the themes are very industrial relations. Well, yeah, industrial relations, but in the Industrial Revolution. So this is life. This really looks at life in the factories. Like there's a conventional romance in here, but it's really about class struggles and how we treat each other, how we treat the North and how we treat the South, compared where we're from, and how we look at how, well, in Victorian times, how the landed gentry looked at these new tradesmen, these mill owners, and sort of looked down upon them. And then the mill owners obviously were doing terrible things to um, the factory workers. And there's obviously the strikes and things in this, which is quite interesting for a Victorian novel. Dickens obviously did a lot of this stuff as well, but I don't really like Dickens as much. yeah, this was super interesting, and I just watched the miniseries of this as well, and there's incredible scenes in it of the the mills. So they must have recreated this mill, and the cotton is sort of floating through the air, and it looks like snow. It's amazing. So if you like this novel, definitely check out the BBC miniseries from, I think it's from around 2004 or 2006 or something. Brilliantly done, and they must have gone to a lot of effort to recreate those mills. Um, the one which defines a time and a place, I think I'm gonna go sort of a bit weird with this one because I think science fiction does this really well. Obviously, with science fiction, you quite often have another character that you don't have in traditional fiction, in that you have a world that is not real and that is created. And I think some science fiction does that so well that it feels like another character. And so it doesn't really define a time, but definitely a place. And I'm going to go with one of the greats of all times, Dune, Arrakis, desert planet. Um, so this book, um, obviously you can see Arrakis here, um, but I feel like Arrakis is another character in this, and I feel like you really get to know it as a planet, and I just think science fiction does that, and fantasy, um, does that in really good way, and this especially, like, you know, the people, the different sort of people that live in this world and their different cultures, and obviously it's sort of a reflection of the Middle East as well, like the spice is oil, isn't it, and things like that. But yeah, incredibly well done in this. I could have also gone with many other sci-fis or fantasies. The Left Hand of Darkness, for example, I love Winter one. In that is another planet that really comes to life. Um, the complex ground baking one, I've gone a bit funny with this one as well. So this one may not be complex in plot, but I think it's complex in the way we analyze it now. And it was definitely groundbreaking, and that is Herodotus' The Histories. So this is regarded as the first history book, but it has some kind of silly stuff in it, like these giant gold digging ants and stuff that we now know cannot be real, but but Herodotus was just traveling around talking to people and writing down things. So he was, in a way, doing some historical analysis because he was going around and comparing people's stories and things, but not in the same way as we would nowadays. Obviously, we would need sources for these giant gold digging ants, but just to be in Herodotus' company in this world, well, in this time and place, it is amazing. And he's just a great person to hang out with. Like, you feel like you're his little mate, like tagging along with him. Um, and I particularly like the first half of the histories, because I think a lot of people go into wanting to learn about like Sparta and the 300 and stuff, but I just love the first bit where he's just wandering around the work. Like, he he goes completely on a tangent about Egypt for ages, and I just love it. I love all his tangents. Definitely not a modern history book, but more fun. So more fun for it anyway. But yeah, I love that, and I do think it was obviously groundbreaking because lots of people call him the father of history or the father of lies. So he definitely made an impact. The one with archetypal characters. So this one I'm sure this type of character existed before, but it has been recreated very famously in the last 20 years. I don't know if that's correct, but and many times since, and that is the Wizard of Earthsea. So this is about a little boy who goes to wizard school and has to face an enemy. Um, yeah, so this has obviously been a massive influence on Harry Potter and many fantasies since. Um, although J.K. Rowling seems to not admit that it is, which is stupid. Um, Lord of the Rings, obviously, another massive part of Harry Potter. And she never seems to want to talk about things like that. And Ursula K. Le Guin described, I think she described Harry Potter as a mediocre, quite mean-spirited novel, which I thought was quite funny. But yeah, love Ursula K. Le Guin, and I think the Ursula books are brilliant. I particularly like the later ones, and you see her grow as an author as she writes these, because the Wizard of Earthsea is one of her very early books, and then the later ones are written 20 years later. And the little wizard boy Ged is now old, and he's dealing with sort of growing old, and Tahani is my favourite one. I love Tahani. But yeah, these are great archetypal characters. Wizards have been around for a long time. I did think about going for the Once and Future King, but yeah, I just think this has quite had an impact on modern fantasy anyway. But yeah, and I think like most fantasy writers have probably read Ursula K. Le Guin at some point. The one that's a complete one-off. This one's really hard because you could like any classic you say, there's gonna have been people who have tried to copy it or stolen bits from it. So I've gone with an author more than a specific book, and I've gone with P.G. Woodhouse, and I just think he's a one-off because there's no one makes me laugh as much as P.G. Woodhouse can. I think it would be hard to write his style of book nowadays as well, because it's so old-fashioned English. But yeah, he's definitely a one-off. And if you've never read P.G. Woodhouse, I highly advise it. Although I often wonder if it's a very English type of humour, but I have seen a lot of Americans, especially, who like P.G. Woodhouse, so it must translate. Yeah, he's just very funny, and that's why he's a one-off. And I think being genuinely funny in books is one of the harder things to pull off. But you don't often get people laughing out loud to books, but P.G. Woodhouse is. I've never regretted picking up one of his books. The one we quote from all the time. So this one, it's a sort of a precursor to September, and I've gone with William Shakespeare. We sort of inadvertently quote from Shakespeare all the time because he obviously added loads of words to our language, but just little phrases and things from Shakespeare pop up all the time. Last night I recommended a TV series to Kelly from Books I'm Not Reading in her Shakespeare Shaketube video. What's it called now? Shaketube? Or I think it's changed its name. Shaketember. And that's a TV series called Slings and Arrows, which is obviously from the Hamlet speech. And it is a TV series basically about a production of Hamlet, so that makes sense. But then there's also Outrageous Fortune, which is a New Zealand TV series, which is from the very same line of Hamlet. And a couple of weeks ago, I was watching The Undiscovered Country, the Star Trek movie, and that's obviously another part of that speech. So just one speech in in one play has created the title of three different things that I've watched. So he's just popping up all the time, and we quote him all the time without even knowing it. So I'm looking forward to reading lots of these. This is a very big, complete works. Lots of these in September. And last question, the rediscovered classic. I'm going to go with someone who was literally sort of disappeared for 15 years, basically. She couldn't get published for 15 years, and that is Barbara Pym, who I would put sort of alongside P.G. Woodhouse as a very funny writer who sort of writes the same book over and over again, but you love it anyway. She basically had 15 years in her life where she couldn't get published. She just fell out of favour with the publishers. And then she sort of started becoming friends with Philip Larkin later in her life. And the TLS did a sort of a list of critics and authors' most underrated novelists of the last 100 years or something. And two of them chose Barbara Pym. Larkin was one of them, and someone else also did. And that sort of brought her back to the attention of publishers. So for the last few years of her life, she was getting published again. But yeah, she's a very funny, sort of very English writer, and she tends to write about English village life. But she writes quite a lot about anthropology as well, which is quite interesting, because I think her dad was an anthropologist, or she worked for an anthropologist or something. But yeah, she's super funny, and if you like sort of Woodhouse, or Muriel Spark, or Nancy Mitford, that kind of thing, you'll probably like Barbara Pym. Yeah, I think I heard about her on the Backlisted podcast, which is a really good thing for rediscovered classics, because the whole premise of that podcast is to look at forgotten books or forgotten authors. So I think a lot of people on BookTube listen to that podcast, but it's really good. And also, I remember Sean the Book Maniac raving about Barbara Pym, and I don't often read a lot of the same books as Sean the Book Maniac. We don't have very similar tastes, but I love his videos, but we don't often have the same taste in things. But Barbara Pym is one we do, and Elizabeth Jane Howard. Yeah, so that's the what's the name of this tag? What makes a classic tag? I think. But I've completely forgotten the name. But yeah, so that was fun. If you like classics, do this tag. See you later, BookTube.